In this video, we present another method for answering questions in the reading passage of the SAT or the ACT. In this method, we are not going to read the passage and annotate first. Instead, we are going to go and read the questions, identify them as local and global questions. So for example, the first question, number 1 over here, is a global question, whereas question number 3 is a local question because it talks about line numbers and specifies where in the passage you can go looking for the answer. So there are basically two different kinds of questions, local and global. In this method, without reading the passage first, we are going to read the questions, and for the global questions, we are going to remember them using some kind of symbols or mnemonics or icons or pictures. I'm a visual person, so I like to remember with symbols and pictures and icons. And for the local questions, we are going to go directly to the line number mentioned and annotate that region. So, for example, I haven't read the passage yet, so I'm using this method where I'm going straight to the questions. The first question is asking me, which choice best describes what happens in the passage? So what happens in the passage is basically the central point of the passage. And human beings don't quite remember sentences and paragraphs like computer hard drives do. We generally tend to associate the material, the gist of that sentence or paragraph or the question in this case, with some connotations that go with it, some connections that you can make with it. So in my case, since this question mainly is asking me about the central point of the passage, I have mapped it to a symbol which I always used for central point or the meat of the passage, and that is a circle with a center. So that's also your typical target symbol. So I remember this question with the symbol, and as a visual person I remember the symbol, and then that symbol notifies to me that there is something about the central point in this passage. There is a question on the central point in the passage. Now, this is my way of remembering the global question, and when I remember the global question, I'm going to keep it on the front burner in my memory and constantly scan for a possible location in the passage. Later on, when I'm reading the passage, I'll remember the question and constantly scan for where in the passage I'm finding an answer to that question that I memorized. That way, anything which is important in the passage will be caught. I will not just gloss over important parts of the passage. Whereas if there are unimportant parts of the passage, then I know that, okay, this part of the passage is not very important, so I need not remember everything in here or try to answer any question. So that's the value of remembering your global questions. Now, for the local questions, like question number 3, I know that it concerns the word directly in lines 1 and 65. So what I do is I'll go back to line 65 over here. The word directly has been used, so I will come here, and this is question number 3. On the margin, I will put Q3, so that later on when I'm reading this part of the passage, that annotation on the margin will catch my eye and I can answer the question with that. Similarly, I'll go back to line 1, and on the margin of that line, I will put Q1 or Q3 and underline the word directly. So that's what I do with my local questions. For the global questions, I remember them throughout my reading of the passage. Once I've finished reading the passage, I just hit a mental reset, and then I forget about the global questions. I move on to the next passage. So a few more examples of this global question. We looked at number 1. Now question number 2, again, if you notice, we do not know where in the passage we can find an answer for this. So I remember the question. This one asks, which choice best describes the developmental pattern in the passage? So the developmental pattern could be a pattern that I recognize like this. So this is my symbol of a certain pattern of development of the passage. Maybe the passage starts in first person where the author is talking about himself. Then he may have generalized that to the greater humanity. Then maybe he starts off in a very jovial mood. Then towards the end of the passage, his mood might change to more somber. But the pattern of the passage is an important question. Question number 2 is asking about that. So I'm going to remember that symbol throughout my reading of the passage later on, so that if I see anything in the passage which concerns this developmental pattern, then I will immediately stop there and I'm going to mark out that portion of the passage, go back to my question to consult which question number it was, and so on. And I'll go and annotate. So in this particular case, let's say we take some other question where we are trying to remember another global question. So let's go to number 4. And number 4 is asking me what reaction does Akira most fear from Chi? So I can think of Akira as a person, and then Chi is the other person. I put A for Akira, C for Chi, and it looks like Akira is a little afraid of some reaction coming in from Chi's side. So a broken arrow with a zigzag in my case implies maybe a fearful reaction, or you can just put an exclamation and notify that as a fearful reaction. So I'm going to remember symbols like this. And now, after I have noted down all the global questions in this passage, I'm going to go and start reading the passage. Remember, in this method, I haven't actually read the passage. I've just found out a way to remember my global questions, and I have annotated some parts of the passage on the margins with the material or information about the local questions. Now I start reading the passage. This passage is from Lydia Minatoya, so I always mark out authors' names. In my case, I would do that within curly braces, for example. And the name of the novel is The Strangeness of Beauty, written in 1999, always boxed by the author Lydia Minatoya. The setting is in Japan in 1920, so this is a historical novel where the actual story is happening in 1920, written in 1999. The setting is Japan, so that's the name of a country. I would mark that. And looks like we already found 2 characters, Chi and her daughter Naomi, members of the house of Fuji. So quite a few important things. Curly braces in my case for remembering the author and the novel, dates within rectangles, and names of characters, or in general proper nouns within circles for me. And if there is a location, I could put that location under C or L. So that's another common symbol that I use. So I've done some annotations while I'm reading this, but unlike the different method where you annotate the passage before you read the questions, your annotation here doesn't have to be that detailed. The only reason I did a detailed annotation is that I'm reading the top part, the introduction to this particular passage. Afterward, my annotation will not be that detailed. Okay, now I start reading the first paragraph. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he approached his mother to speak to his had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between? Would she have been more receptive? Now, what is happening here is that Akira is having some self-doubts. Like, did he do the right thing by apparently breaking some tradition? Was that it? Had he followed form? He's wondering if he had actually followed the cultural or the traditional norms and asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between to come and speak with Chi. Would Chi have been more receptive? So it looks like in that Japanese culture, instead of speaking directly with somebody, you'd like to hire a go-between to come and do the speaking for you. Now, when I read this paragraph, the first thing that came to my mind was that looks like Akira and Chi are the two central players in this paragraph, and Akira is afraid of Chi's reaction. Would Chi have been more receptive? And that immediately brings to my mind that question where we had spent some time making a connection between Akira and Chi, and Akira was supposed to be worried about some reaction from Chi, fearful about some reaction from Chi. So if you go back to that question where we saw that, you'll notice that this was question number 4. Which reaction does Akira fear most from Chi? And remember, in the test booklet, this would have been annotated for you with the annotation that we had drawn before, where we had Akira, we had Chi, and Chi had a reaction, and Akira was scared of that reaction from Chi. So that annotation would be sitting there, and now we have found the right part of the passage where we can actually get material to answer question number 4. So I'm going to go back to that paragraph and put a Q4 somewhere here. And then when I reach the end of the paragraph, that would be my cue to go and answer everything that I can from this paragraph. In this particular case, I have indeed reached the end of the paragraph, and so I'm going to say, well, it looks like he was worried about Chi's reaction because he did not follow tradition. He had broken tradition. So now let's go and take a look at the answer choice over here. So what reaction? The first one is Chi would consider his proposal inappropriate. Let's keep it. This is a keeper. Because when he breaks tradition and he's worried that Chi might find it to be out of the norm, that's another way of saying that Chi might find his proposal to be inappropriate. So let's keep that. Number B, she is Chi here, will mistake him or his earnestness, Akira's earnestness, for immaturity. And that was not one of the points of discussion. It was not about immature Akira. It was not about his immaturity in the way he brought his proposal. It was about breaking traditions, not following norms, and therefore inappropriate. So we'll strike out B. Then C, she will consider his unscheduled visit an imposition. So it's not about the timing of the visit. He's not worried about just coming across as an imposition. Again, he's more worried about the appropriateness. So C is out. And finally, she will underestimate his sincerity of emotions. So Akira, at least in this first paragraph, did not worry about whether Chi would think that Akira, is not very sincere with his emotions or his proposal. So that is out. And therefore, we are left with A, which is going to match with what Akira was afraid about, breaking traditions and therefore making his proposal inappropriate. So in this way, you can answer questions, and because I remembered question number 4, a global question, when I was reading that first paragraph, I came across material where I realized that the material that I just read in that paragraph had a direct match to one of the global questions, because I remembered the global question, and therefore I could go here and say, hey, this is question number 4, and then at the end of that paragraph I managed to answer that question. Now remember, just because you have answered a question doesn't mean you should forget the question, because oftentimes in this test you will end up getting the same material. I'm just making an example up, but maybe somewhere here you will again find material to answer question number 4. In this case, it didn't happen here. I'm just giving an example. So if you later on find the context again where there is some material for question number 4, you might want to go back to question number 4, look at your answer, and in the light of the new material, you might decide to either keep the previous answer or change it. So that is a useful technique. And when you do that, my suggestion is make all your answers, mark them on the test booklet so that you don't have to change anything on the Scantron. And after you have answered all the questions from a certain passage and you're ready to move on to the next passage, then you move all your answers from this passage to the Scantron. Okay? That's a very useful technique to follow. So in this particular method, we read a paragraph at a time. If we see any annotation for a local question, that's there, good. if we see some material which can potentially answer some global question, you want to mark out that portion or that relevant portion of the passage. And at the end of that paragraph, you answer all the local and global questions that you could from that paragraph that you just read. So what we are doing is a lockstep mechanism during the reading and answering process. First, I remember all the questions or annotate for the local ones, and I remember the global ones. Then you start reading the passage. You read a paragraph and you answer material from that paragraph. Then you go and read the next paragraph and you answer more material from more questions from that paragraph. So you read a paragraph at a time and then you answer questions based on that paragraph. You read the next paragraph and you answer questions based on that paragraph, and so on.